There you are. Okay. All right. Welcome. Hi, everybody. My name is Nicole Gillen, and welcome. Today is another episode in our 30-minute memoir series. So what I'd like to do is just go ahead and get things kicked off, and then I'll introduce our special guest for today. So for anyone who has not seen one of these previously, I am a mom who is a caregiver of an adult daughter with schizophrenia. And I wrote a book, which we're not going to really talk about today, but it really kind of prompted me in the process of writing it about just how complicated this space is. And interestingly enough, how little voice there is to anyone who's diagnosed or to their caregivers in this community. There's a lot of doctors out there doing webinars and things like that, and that's great. But at the end of the day, I wanted to try and give voice to people who are in this every single day. So what I always hope to accomplish in one of these sessions is shedding light on the challenges that this community faces, but also how resilient everyone is. I'd love to show victories and moments of success despite the challenges. And in each one of these sessions, I try to focus on one area of topic. So that way we really can have a meaningful conversation. So let me go ahead and share my screen real fast, which is something I always do at this point, just to make sure we're all on the same page. And I'll put it in slideshow mode so it's easier for everyone to see. So today's fireside chat is with Jennifer Gerlach. Jennifer, did I say that correctly? Good, perfect, thank you. So Jennifer's a therapist. She's a writer. She's a speaker. She's a blogger. This is a woman who is out there really seeking to share hope on topics related to serious mental illness. And she covers a lot when she does her writing and her speaking. She's also the author of the Psychosis and Mental Health Recovery Workbook, which is tools for young adults from ACT, DBT, and Recovery-Oriented CBT, which are all the right things to help people really kind of navigate their illness and try to get to a healthier place. And is also a person living with her own mental health conditions. So I'm really excited to hear from Jennifer because she sees a lot, both from obviously her own perspective and with people that she serves. So I think today's discussion is going to be really interesting and probably a little bit different from some of the other ones. In terms of today's discussion, we're going to focus on navigating crisis. And if you are someone out there who has either experienced serious mental illness yourself or you take care of someone, you've navigated crises. And I think Jennifer is going to have some really interesting talking points that might be really helpful today to help everyone around what it means to navigate crises. So that is all I'm going to share in terms of a deck. I'm going to pull it down because at this point, what I want everyone to do is really hear from Jennifer, her story, and, sort of her perspective on navigating crisis. Jennifer? Did I lose you?
I think briefly I heard navigating crisis but I think I've got you back. Can you hear me?
Yes, no problem. All right, so over to you then, Dave.
Wonderful. So, yeah, I am a clinician, but I'm also a person living with mental health challenges. So I'm going to start with my lived experience and then kind of go a little bit into clinical stuff. I was a weird kid, and that started probably from when I was born. I was the kid that in preschool, the preschool teacher was calling home and saying, "Hey, we have some concerns about autism, and also your daughter walks in circles during lunch and will not go into the bathroom because of the loud air dryer." It's the kid in third grade where the teacher was like, "Hey, your kid lacks common sense, and she comes to school sometimes not wearing shoes, and you might want to make sure your kid has shoes on before she comes to school." I was a kid, fifth grade, where I gave my necklace to another kid to try to hypnotize me to be a good kid. So, but, I kind of made it through. These were weird things, but, I was a 90s kid. They put me on Ritalin and we went on with life. Around the age of 11, though, things started to change. I went from being a obnoxious, loud kid to actually someone who was really super quiet and really stuck in my mind. And at the time, I had these really loud, scary thoughts, and I didn't know how to vocalize them. Around that time, I was thinking a lot about death. I was thinking a lot about cancer, third world countries, consciousness, things that are kind of normal for kids to have questions about, but I was really stuck. And I remember that there was a time, it was actually before age 11, I think closer to 9, when I went into the bathroom. I was examining my neck and looking for where I could cut if I wanted to in my life, because I was just ready to stop worrying so much about dying that I thought if I died, I wouldn't have to worry about dying. That's a pretty prestigious age to start having thoughts about suicide. I didn't know suicide was a thing. My parents didn't know that even happened. So I had some stuff going on. These loud, scary thoughts led to me withdrawing, acting very bizarrely, doing things that people didn't understand. And by the age of 13, the school and my parents were quite, worried about me. And I remember my mom driving me about 45 minutes to a place that had a very secure space. There was kind of barbed wire, and it was all psychiatric care. It was an all psychiatric care facility. Uh, she had told me I was going to see a doctor. I was starting to wonder what was going on. She walked me into the building and she said I would like to have her admitted, me. I didn't know
Mm.
anything about hospitals. I didn't know anything about that this was going to happen. I thought they're putting me in like an institution for a long time, and it was a big, scary building. Um, and that was the first of my hospitalizations. I didn't know why I was there. In fact, in my records, it says when they asked me why I was there, I said my mom asked me to get into the car and she told me I was going to a hospital. So that was my reason for admission, like in quotes, very literal. They put me on medication. The medication zoned me out. I went from a kid, like I think one of the first days I was there, I was like running around the gym and doing chin ups and like playing arm wrestling with the boys, to a kid that was just kind of like rolling a ball back and forth and was just kind of totally sedated and zoned out. And they just charged me. I didn't think I had an illness. I didn't think I needed the medication. I wanted to stop taking it. I was afraid of going back to the hospital. So I went through all kind of different things to not take the medication, like spitting it out, hiding it under my tongue, trying to get home when I'd get a new medication before my mom actually saw the medicine, getting rid of the medicine, flushing it down the toilet, putting a vitamin or another benign substance, like a vitamin, into the medication bottle. My mom would think she was giving me the medicine, she was giving me vitamins. So she'd like check my tongue and I like totally swallowed it, but it wasn't that. Um, and I went back to the hospital over and over. And I didn't understand. From my perspective, there was nothing wrong with me. I didn't think that I had an illness. And all of these people were trying to push all this treatment and these really invasive and difficult medications. And that's a really common thing, anosognosia, I'm sure you guys are pretty aware of. Um, Went through a whole bunch of diagnoses, went to a therapeutic school, got a new psychiatrist who was actually a really wonderful woman who took some time to get to know me. She said, okay, we'll stop the medication for a minute. She put me back on medication, but she asked what was worrisome to me. I said my attention issues, so we focused on that for a minute. And I started saying, okay, maybe there's something going on and I want help. But that was only the first step, because with treatment, I would try medication after medication after medication, and sometimes they'd work a little bit, and sometimes they would help, and sometimes they wouldn't. As I got older, it started to morph into these really deep depressions and times when I really would not want to be alive, not because I was afraid of dying, but because I was in so much emotional pain. I would have times of fear that were similar to terror, of just the sense that something really bad was going to happen, that,
Mm.
maybe I was going to be apprehended, that somebody was kind of watching me. I felt that I might have been harassed by demons at a point. I was hearing these loud voice-like thoughts telling me things like, God hates you, you're going to hell, a lot of profanity, panic attacks. It was a very difficult thing. But by this time, and this is my late adolescence, early young adulthood, first couple of years of college, I admitted that I had an illness. I understood that I had an illness. And I think that that was a really key thing for me getting help at that point because I wasn't going in and out of the hospital anymore. I was going to the support groups like NAMI and DBSA. I was, seeing a psychiatrist, and I wasn't always compliant, but, I was working it. It took a lot. It took a lot of treatment. We finally got it right. Um, I have a really fantastic psychiatrist today who I feel like he's on Team Jen. I feel like he's on my side. He wants me to do well. I don't worry as much now about diagnosis because ultimately I'm more interested in being the best that I can be, regardless of
Hmm.
what the diagnosis is. Because that was a sticking point too. I used to argue about like, I don't have this or I don't think I have that, or, and it felt very hurtful, especially these big scary labels when you're a kid and you're like, well, does that mean that I'm not going to be able to function or do the things that I want to do? So I went to college. I wanted to help other people. I wanted to show other people that, hey, there can be somebody on your team and you can get better from this thing that can feel so hopeless that you might not want to be on this earth anymore. And so I chose to specialize in psychosis and autism. Um, started doing psychotherapy, really loved that, worked in the first episode psychosis program for a bit. Now I work in private practice. And so I do more creative psychotherapies. I do a lot of acceptance commitment therapy, which is a certain type of therapy that is used for a variety of mental health conditions, including ones involving psychosis. And I really just try to spread hope. Wrote the book to try to spread hope, especially to young people, because I remember, when I was going through this, there wasn't a lot out there for young people. It was more books written for parents. And a lot of those books were really, about the worst parts of the illness. And I wasn't ready for that. I needed something hopeful. And I wanted to give other people a sense of hope of like, hey, you're still the same person behind your eyes, no matter what you're going through. And there are people out there who can support you. There are psychiatrists out there who will help you out. Hopefully your family is on your team, you know. Um, but all that to say, it's gotten a lot better. And I'm glad that I'm on this. And I, really have a life that I love. I have a partner. We've been together 14 years. He is a wonderful human who has put a hammock indoors for me at times because I love to lay on hammocks and just does a lot of creative, fun things for me. And yeah, that's my story.
It's amazing. And it's funny is the whole sort of like pushing against the diagnosis. I think sometimes we all get so hung up on labels
Hmm.
and is it this or is it this? And at the end of the day, does
Yeah,
it matter, right? How do we treat the human to get them to a better place, whatever that looks like? I mean, labels can be
yeah,
helpful, but they also can put someone in a box that makes them very uncomfortable,
sure,
you know?
sure. Yeah, it's easy.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about
Sorry, are you with me?
crisis. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Can you hear me? Am I
Yes.
breaking up? All right, good. So, crisis. Crisis can mean hospitalization, police, jail, someone who's run away. How can a caregiver be prepared for the unpreparable? How can someone who's diagnosed be looking out for the warning signs that a crisis is coming? How does someone prepare, either diagnosed or caregiver?
Yeah. So crisis so many different things. Our states define what would be criteria for involuntary hospitalization is strictly thoughts of suicide, thoughts of homicide. They say, hey, are you suicidal or homicidal? And a person says no, and they're like, oh, they're fine. We'll release them out into the community. And that's not how it works, unfortunately, with this illness, or these illnesses. So I think that once you've had a crisis and you've gotten stable, that's a fantastic time to make a plan for if it happens again. Hopefully it won't. It's kind of like
Mm.
finding the exit, the fire exit of if I need this, I can use it. And that would be what are your warning signs? So for me, some of my warning signs would be going more than one night without sleep and not being able to sleep, or, having the loud thoughts to a point where I'm starting to respond to the thoughts, or going into a really deep depression. It might be different for someone else. And then intervening as early as possible. Some people choose to have a person that's kind of pointed out that this person will start making decisions for me during a crisis. I've never had to do that personally, but I know others who have. I know that sometimes guardianship is part of that as well, and that can be a really difficult piece because there's a huge step there. But unfortunately, when you're in psychosis, your ability to reason is so compromised
Yeah.
that it's difficult to make good decisions. And the way the system is set up, it's difficult for the people around you to get you help unless you're going to go in there and say, I'm thinking about suicide, or I'm thinking about homicide.
Oof, I know. And so, it's heartbreaking because crisis seems to be an underpinning of serious mental illness. Is there a way out of this? Does it have to be? It's this crisis thing that's so uh, present. Like, is there anything that someone can do? I mean, yes, therapy can help and things like that, but fundamentally, is it like it's gonna happen? So be prepared, you know?
It's tricky. It's tricky because you can do everything right and still have a major mood episode or a major psychotic episode. But having a good team around you, having a psychiatrist or psychiatric nurse practitioner that you trust, that you can talk to, that can kind of help you monitor things. Having a plan to catch it early, because the earlier you catch a crisis, the more you can do about it, before it gets to a point where the person loses insight, ideally. But that's not always possible. And there are people out there who will have one psychotic episode, or will have, get stable on the right medication or get stable on the right treatment, and then not be at risk for crisis very much. But it's so unpredictable because it can happen.
I know. And so, all right, let's look then at the mental health care system from two lenses. The first one is what, from your perspective, as somebody who's in the mental health care system, what can they do to help someone who is diagnosed or the families better prepare? Is this something that the families and the person have to do on their own? Or could a hospital help with this? Could their therapist help with this? Like, to what degree does it start to become a division of, church and state,
Yeah, so it's so tricky. Because ideally, when the system is functioning well, there are crisis response teams in place, a mobile crisis unit where a therapist can meet the person where they are, do a crisis risk assessment, do some engagement, and get them to the appropriate level of care. And a family member, the individual, can call a number and have that happen. Unfortunately, those resources aren't available in every area. And unfortunately, even when they are available, sometimes the crisis worker shows up and the system, it escalates. The person's not happy that they're getting a crisis assessment. They tell the crisis worker, I'm not suicidal or homicidal. I don't want to talk to you. And then it gets very complex. I think that having a good team when the person is not in crisis makes a big difference when they are. So having, again, the psychiatrist, the therapist that are in place that the person trusts and they have a relationship with, that would be the point people ideally. I don't think it should all fall on family. That's not fair, and that's not utilized in any health condition. But unfortunately, with our system, oftentimes it is family members advocating for their loved one and saying, hey, they are ill, they do need help. And the system sometimes being more or less receptive based on whatever laws or criteria or resources are available.
Yeah. All right. So then, okay. So let's just say I'm diagnosed and I've got my psychiatrist, I've got my therapist, I've got my mother or my sister or my whatever. If you were to give me the top 3 things, 5 things, if you were to give me the sort of like, okay, as the person who's diagnosed, here are the things you must do with that system. I've got my system of people. What are the very specific things I'm doing? What does it mean to plan? What does it mean to prepare? What are those specifics? Do you have any suggestions?
Yeah, so I think that first it's important that the people know how you are when you're well and how that might be different from when you're not well. Because what might look like a crisis for one person might not be a crisis for another person. Second, making it known what your wish is for, what hospitals you prefer, what hospitals you don't, who your team is, having things written out, like in a psychiatric advance directive or crisis plan that can be of help. I think that it's always helpful to have aspirations that you're working toward. And I know this kind of veers away from crisis, but it doesn't in another way because a lot of crisis comes from lack of hope. Having aspirations, having things that are important to you, and keeping those front in your mind of family, friends, work, whatever it is that's meaningful to you, and keeping that going for yourself. Because this illness does not have to mean that life's over and that the rest of your life is focused on
Mhm.
managing it, but having things outside of it, I think that's super important. And then finally, having a plan for if you do get into crisis, what you need coming out of it. So, do you need somebody to help you with your pets? Do you need to have a plan for how you might apologize to friends? Because sometimes people end up losing friends after a crisis, and they don't know that this is really normal, to
Yeah.
have certain symptoms that people don't understand and then people ditch. And so how are you going to apologize if that's necessary, or how can you maintain friendships? There's a really cool program. It's called Wellness Recovery Action Planning. Um, Created by Dr. Mary Ellen Copeland. I completed a RAP plan when I was an adolescent, and I still have one today. Um, but it goes through all those stages of, early warning signs, crisis plan, post-crisis plan, and then also discussions about things like hope and support.
I gotta tell you what, Jennifer, you said two things that I've never heard before in the context of crisis that I think are so important. And I want to go back and put an exclamation point on both. The first one is the normalization of crisis is going to happen. So, you know what? Let's just all, you know what? We embrace it. We figure it out. We embrace it. It's not abnormal. It's part of the recovery process of this illness. And the second thing you said that I thought was so interesting was not losing sight of the things that give your life meaning if you're the person who's diagnosed. And knowing that whatever those things are that give you meaning, that even though you're in crisis, don't try not to lose sight of them, because those are the things that are in your heart. And those are the things that can hopefully maybe one day help bring you out to where you're at and into a healthier place. And I love those two sentiments. I think those are really beautiful and so different and interesting, right? Because there's so much stigma around schizophrenia or on anything that has psychosis that we all sort of hunker down, like avoid it, don't talk about crisis. But what you're saying is it's reality. So let's normalize it and let's figure out a plan and don't lose what's important in your heart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think everybody needs meaning. It's not just people with mental health conditions that need meaning, but it's important to keep something in place. And it doesn't have to be some grand plan to become the president or something.
Well,
It could
maybe.
be just like yeah, these days, but it could be things like I'm going to enjoy laying in my hammock tomorrow. Going to enjoy my coffee tomorrow. I'm going to enjoy talking to my mom. I'm going to enjoy petting the dog. Keeping those little good things in mind. And then also what matters. Being a kind person matters to me. To another person, it might be, trying and keep going no matter what. Or having hope that the future can be better than today. Sometimes meaning is having a belief that you might have meaning in the future. It's not, if today you don't feel meaning, it can be saying, okay, well, I'm going to stick around just to see what tomorrow holds, to see if tomorrow gets better. Um, but that's so important because it's not all bleak. And I feel like we can get in this really negative cycle, especially when somebody has an illness where they are having repeated crises, if they haven't found effective medication routine for them and they are in and out of hospital, it can become this revolving door. And sometimes I think the exit to that is not just managing the symptoms, but having a sense of purpose and having a sense of aspiration and things that don't have to do with the illness.
Yeah, it's true. It's that sense of purpose. And I know, with my own daughter, she struggled because she lost her sense of purpose. And we're slowly starting to rebuild it, and she's starting to
Sure.
envision what could look like in the future. But, it for a couple years, she was lost in the fog, and the illness was winning. And it's interesting, as we recently had a discussion about, at the end of the day, if the illness is going to win, what does that look like for her? And to what degree can she
Mm.
influence her own body and her own will and her own desires while the illness may still be there? Can she still find that purpose? Can she find that vision? Can she find that place where it might not be where she was prior,
Wow.
but might be a new place moving forward?
Yeah. 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 That's beautiful. That's
Yeah.
beautiful because it's a detour, right? Like none of us planned for this. If we had a way, I would, any of us would say mental illness not be a thing. And I wouldn't be a therapist. I love being a therapist, but if I could not be a therapist and there's no mental illness, I'll find another problem to work on.
Exactly.
Maybe I'll work in the prison system or something. But the reality is that we all end up here, some way or another, and can we find some meaning in it? I think that many people I've met with mental health conditions become very creative because of the level of emotion that they've felt and the level of ways that the mind has bent things or trying to figure out different ways to get around it. I've met many very kind and compassionate people living with mental health conditions because once you've had that experience of feeling so powerless that even your mind's not really on your side, it helps you empathize with other people. It really
Yeah. And
does. And so
I,
some of the most compassionate people I've met have been individuals. Yeah.
who struggle with some sort of serious mental illness. And I cannot agree with you more. Like, it's one of the things that I've noticed out of my daughter is this heightened level of compassion, because she came out of such a dark place that now she can look at other people in other situations with a whole new level of empathy and understanding. And so it's this beautiful outcome from this really terrible thing she's had to go through. And so, it's funny, Jennifer, at this
Yeah.
point, I normally say,
Yeah.
well, what's our positive statement? And I feel like you already incorporated the positive statement. So we already have it. But so let me ask you this, then.
Okay.
Is
Okay.
there any final wisdom or anything you want to just sort of put out there? Because I love what you've already said. So, but is there anything else? Because this has been really phenomenal.
Yeah, I do want to take a minute to be an ambassador for my fellow mental health clinicians and just say that we do want to include family. I know sometimes it can be difficult. I know sometimes the system ices people out. Sometimes people are terrified of HIPAA. They think they're going to get sued for just like looking at your phone number on the ID. Um, but most of us do want to include you guys and we do want to be able to see our clients succeed. And so if you are having anxieties about getting involved in your loved one's treatment, I think a therapist tends to be pretty open. You can always ask, hey, like, would it be okay for me to come to a session? Or do they have any resources that they'd like to send for me? Um, because I think that can also be helpful in a crisis if we have a release of information that's signed, that we can communicate and figure something out if somebody's in a compromised state, and then you have that relationship and rapport built. I know it's not always realistic, and I'm sure that there's some people watching here who've had horrible experiences with therapists and other members of the mental health system, and I've had some negative myself, but I just want to say that, if you're kind of thinking, oh, I don't know, most of us do want to include you guys. So,
That's awesome. And it's true. And
yeah,
we've had some wonderful experiences with some and some less than wonderful experiences with others. And it's with anything, right? You're always going to get a mixed bag. So I appreciate that. So awesome. So Jennifer, thank you. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing your wisdom.
absolutely.
I am walking away honestly smarter in a profound way because of this, albeit brief conversation. So this has been phenomenal. I will, as I always do in the show notes, I will put links to your website and your book and everything else so people can find you. If anyone wants more information on me, I've got my website, which is schizophrenia-caregiver.com. And then my book is on Amazon, and I'll put all that in the show notes as well. And otherwise, we are good. So thank you, Jennifer. Thank you.
Very glad that you guys are creating this resource to highlight the lived experiences of individuals and families who've been affected. And I cannot give there for families to access.
Wonderful. All right, awesome. Well, in that case, I'm going to go ahead and hit stop.